Now here it is, sweepers, ready to move. Clean sweep down, fore and aft. Empty all trash containers on the dock.
So this is Slater's radio room, also called Radio Central. All the equipment you see in here is more or less World War II era, and almost everything works as well. So you'd have guys sitting at these typewriters with headphones on, listening to the Morse code. The Morse code is how you transmit messages while you're out at sea, and it's all encrypted. That way, if the enemy does intercept your message, they're gonna have a hard time figuring out what it says. It also means these guys, they don't know what it says. So they're gonna type it out on their typewriter. When they're done, they're gonna rip it off. They're gonna come over to the coding room, knock on the door. They're gonna open it up, make sure you're friendly, you're allowed to be over here. You hand them the message, they'll shut it on you. And then they would have an ECM or a SIGINT decryption machine in there. It's basically a typewriter. And they'll type it in and tell you what the message says. And the allied message with the ECM machine was never broken by either the Japanese or the Germans. Ever. Whereas we captured the Enigma machine for the Germans and broke their code very early on in the war. Germans were never able to break our codes. Every Saturday we do have volunteers that come aboard and they communicate with other people from the Slater. You can contact us. It's all on our website. You can chat with us, usually on Saturdays.
Those are ham radio operators?
Basically. But we can also do Morse code. The Morse code still works. We have a guy. You can come out and chat with him on Morse code, which is pretty cool.
This looks like something out of like an old, like a Frankenstein.
Yeah, actually the volunteer that manufactured this switch for us just passed away about 2 weeks ago as well. So a lot of our volunteers are starting to pass away. Don Norris, he was a Slater crew member. He just passed away this summer, but he was one of the radio guys on board. So that's why we have his life jacket up here. So we have a couple rooms on this level. This small like closet is our chart room. Originally it was the captain's like sea cabin, like his office. Very quickly after she was commissioned, they converted into a chart room. Just do all of your charts. One of our quartermasters, Dan Drummond, we have his life jacket there. He actually passed away also this year, earlier in the summer. That we know of, there's only 4 or 5 World War II veterans from the Slater left. And here we have the Combat Information Center, or CIC. This is the brains of the ship. It's where all of your radar is housed. So you have surface radar to track ships or submarines that are on the surface. And of course your air radar to track any aircraft. So not only do we hunt submarines, but we have the firepower on board, anti-aircraft guns, to do some serious damage against other aircraft. Usually your executive officer is in command of this. Some destroyer escorts had it different. The England, which has the record for most submarine kills, their executive officer was actually up on the flying bridge during all the battles. So he was not down here. All dependent on your ship. But you have status board to track everything in your convoy in the corner. You have your chart here. You can get a grease pen. So your ship is in the center and you can take relative bearing measures for enemy aircraft or ships and track everything more or less in real time. We have some announcements that you can send through here.
Combat, this is the officer of the deck on the flying bridge. Commander Blanc wants you to take a look with the air search radar about 90 degrees to port. One of the lookouts thinks he saw an air contact but ducked behind a cloud. Please look and report right back.
So that's basically saying a lookout on our flying bridge, which is up this ladder here. The flying bridge is a deck above us, but there's no roof. So you're completely exposed. But your officers, your captain, and your lookouts will be up there. They can see everything. So that message is saying a lookout on the flying bridge believes he saw an airplane go behind some clouds. So he's radioing to the guys in CIC, check the air radar, 90 degrees to port, and figure out if there was a plane. But you can also figure out if it's friendly or enemy as well. And then you'll radio back and then go from there. But this room is top secret, just like the radio room below us. The door's going to be shut. There's no windows, no portholes. You have one fan Now throw yourself in the South Pacific in the summertime, 110 degrees outside, and you're in a steel ship with the door shut and no airflow. These guys were cooking. Plus you got all your equipment going, so that's going to increase the heat. If your ship is sinking or it's being boarded by the enemy and you feel like you're going to lose the fight, you take your first job here before you jump overboard to save yourself. Get an axe, a sledgehammer, a gun, if you have access to a gun. Destroy all the equipment in here. It's top secret stuff. Your code books in the radio room, you throw in a canvas bag that has weights in it, throw it over the side, it will sink to the ocean floor. That way the enemy can't get your code books. And you also destroy your radio equipment as well.
Combat Information Center is the nerve center of the ship. So radar is going to read out here. Sonar is going to be piped in from the sonar shack, because sometimes you can tell what the U-boat is doing based on the change in the sound quality of the ping. And also visual reports are going to be collected here. All that information is taken here and passed to the captain. So it serves as a collecting point for the senses of the ship. We tend to think of World War II as an antique kind of war, because it was 80 years ago. But for the men in World War II, it is absolutely a war of technology. Radar is brand new in World War II. It's never been used in combat. And the same with active sonar. Some of the young men who were sent to training to learn how to operate and maintain these electronics used to joke that instead of Combat Information Center, the letter CIC stood for Christ, I'm Confused. And that's because they're coming from homes where the only piece of electronics their family owned was a radio. So we talked about the learning curve and how fast and how much you've got to learn. This is a tremendous amount for these guys to pick up. They need to learn in a hurry, and they need to be accurate. The safety of the ship depends upon their accuracy here. You always have red lights on in this compartment because the radar display is green. And you're going to see the green detail in better clarity with red light than you would with white light. So this is the surface plot. Your ship is always assumed to be at the center, and you can take grease pencil and mark in the positions of all the ships around you. And that's going to allow you to avoid collisions. It's going to tell you where you are in relation to everybody else, because it's grease pencil, so you can constantly update it. You can erase it and move things around.
So these 360 degrees, this is relative. This isn't has nothing to do with the compass. This is the relative bearing from the ship.
Correct.
Right. So all of this is new, relatively new technology. I mean, like you said, the radar,
Correct.
Invented it during the wartime, or
brand new in World War II. It's never been used in combat force for a while. The older officers in the Navy don't even trust it. They don't understand how it works, and they don't think it can show you something that they can't see with their eyes. Now you also have an air plot here. This is for tracking aircraft. So again, you're considered to be at the center. Aircraft reports are going to be put in grease pencil on the air plot.
So so the sensors, right? We see all of this stuff. Who's carrying this information or transmitting this information down to the folks here in CIC who then plot it?
So typically on the radar side, you would have perhaps 5 people in here. You'd have 2 radar operators. You'd have 2 people taking the information from radar and record keeping it on the plots, and then you'd have an officer to supervise.
Mm-hmm.
But again, kind of depends on what you're doing, whether you're battle stations or not. Captains, especially if they're going into combat, might take a guy who's off duty, who's their best radar guy, and put him here, because they want to have that little edge. They want to have absolutely everything going in their favor that they can. If Fred is better at radar than Jim, I'm going to yank Fred and put him on the radar. So there's a lot going on in here. In a bigger ship, obviously, they have much bigger and better equipment, and it's much more precise. We're a little spoiled because now in modern times, we know where everything is all the time, or we think we do, right? Here, it's still all dependent on people. The radar can be the best radar in the world, but I need the human eyeball to look at it and interpret it.
So all of this information is so overwhelming for one person. How does this get multiplexed and distilled down to something useful for the captain?
So CIC is going to tell the captain what they think the captain needs to know, and they can do that a couple of different ways. There are voice tubes. When you go into the pilot house, you'll see that the bridge is above us. That's typically where the captain is. You also have sound-powered phones where you can talk on the phone. Now, some captains, when they were prosecuting sonar contacts, actually preferred to be in CIC. Because if the submarine's underwater, being up on the bridge doesn't do me any good. Whereas here, I can see my position in the convoy, I can see where sonar is telling me the U-boat is, I can see what I'm doing actually better here than out in the open, which is very new for warfare. Prior to this, people always wanted to have their eyeballs on the target, but you can't see a submarine when it's underwater.
Here we have our depth charges. Slater has two types of depth charges. This big fella, like barrel looking thing, it's called an ash can or Mark 6. It's World War I era, but it would have had 300 pounds of explosives stuffed inside here. World War II, they designed the smaller teardrop shape, Mark 9 depth charge, only 200 pounds of TNT. The smaller is actually a little more effective. Because of the shape of the teardrop depth charge, it'll sink about 3 times as fast as this. But they both work the same way. So, if you believe there's a U-boat near you or a Japanese sub, you go to general quarters, you ready to your crew here, how far out and how deep you think it is. At each station is this wrench. And the ends of the depth charges, the numbers. That's the depth for this to explode at. So, you just put your wrench on. And of course, it's always set in safe mode. You can see it's not currently. But you always want it in safe, such as that, because if the ship also sinks, if it's at safe, it's not going to explode. But if you had set to 30 feet, when the ship sinks to 30 feet, this is going off no matter what. And then you're going to have a chain reaction of all these depth charges. Meanwhile, you guys are floating in the water above. So, it's in safe. You get a U-boat contact, and they tell you it's at 75 feet. So you twist the wrench, 75 feet. Great. But now you need to get this off. This is what you're going to be using. It's called a K-gun. Basically, this charge right here is going to have almost like gunpowder inside, a certain amount, depending on how far off you want this to fire. So say you want this to shoot 300 feet off the side of the ship. It's more or less going to be filled. If you wanted to fire 50 feet off the side, a lot less. You're going to open up the breech, load the entire charge. You can see basically a firing pin, just like a normal gun. This does get stuck in there, but typically when you open it back up, it would be ejected. So we'll just pretend. Once that's all set, you close it, lock it down, and arm this by flipping it back. When the order comes to fire, you turn your back and pull. That gunpowder is going to ignite. The explosion goes up through the K-gun and fires the depth charge, as well as the cradle it's sitting on. It's called an arbor. You have replacements right back here. Upwards of 300 feet off the side of the ship. It'll begin to sink when it reaches the depth you'd set it to. So in our case, 75 feet, just the ocean pressure above compresses all this, and it will know when it reaches 75 feet, and it'll go boom. You don't actually have to hit the submarine with a depth charge for it to do damage. It can explode anywhere from 20 to about 75 feet away, and then you're just relying on the explosive wave underwater going out, doing all the damage for you. But you'll notice we have K-guns on the starboard side, we have some on the port side, and then in the back of the ship, we have more depth charges. So these depth charges are not on K-guns. They don't fire off the side. They're going to be used if you think the sub is directly under you or you're about to go over them. So they're just on a roller. You take a pin out and they roll off the back of your ship. But just like the other ones, you set the depth. But if you set it to 30 feet, well, this sinks 8 feet per second. So do the math. It's going to reach 30 feet very quickly. If you aren't going full speed ahead or relatively fast, if you're too close to that explosion, you could damage your own ship. And it did happen to a few. This right here is probably one of the most important things you could have on a ship of any type during World War II, especially if you were in the North Atlantic facing the Germans. So German U-boats had the experimental acoustic torpedo. Basically, they didn't have to figure out all the firing solution. All they got to do is aim and fire the torpedo. It'll keep going until it hears loud noise. So our engines latch on the noise of the engine and just come in and hit your ship. And the first destroyer escort ever sunk in World War II was actually hit by a single acoustic torpedo, split them in half. So if you believe there's a U-boat near you, or there's been U-boat activity in the past few days, you attach a Foxer gear. It's basically like a noisemaker to this line, run it out behind your ship, maybe 100 yards, and it's going to make a bunch of noise. If that acoustic torpedo is fired at you, hopefully it's going to latch onto the sound of that noisemaker and explode 100 yards away and not actually damage your ship. It'll also give your guys on board here to figure out where that torpedo came from and where the U-boat is. So that acoustic torpedo, we didn't really know much about it during the war. When the German U-boat U-505 was captured in the spring of 1944 by destroyer escorts, they brought it to Bermuda. While they were on board, the Americans, they discovered a acoustic torpedo. They didn't really know what it was, so they needed to send it up north to Norfolk for the scientists to basically take it apart, figure out how this thing works. Just so happens, at the same time, Slater was in Bermuda during her shakedown cruise. So this is June of 1944. So they gave it to us. Up on the the 01 deck, right in front of the smokestack, they put mattresses on the deck, put the torpedo on it, lashed it, and sent us north to Virginia. And we unloaded it. Some of the guys on board the Slater were afraid it was booby-trapped and it was going to explode. So they did not want to sleep below decks in case of that event. And then they get trapped down there and the ship sinks. So they did request from the captain, hey, can we sleep outside tonight? And the captain didn't let them. A couple of the guys slept right up here. We have a bathythermograph. So this would actually take temperature, water measurements, basically. So a few feet underwater, the thermal layer, it's going to be different temperatures. So you need to lower this, figure it out, and then you can actually adjust your sonar. Very important, especially if you're out there tracking U-boats like the Slater was.
Well, the temperature of the water affects the sound or something?
Well, the sonar signal going out can mess it up, and some subs would actually sit in that thermal layer and make it harder for them to be detected. So
I see.
You need to lower this in the water if you think there is a sub near you, or just to get the general idea of what the thermal layer is, how deep it is, and adjust your sonar for
Right,
to compensate.
calibrate that, right.
Exactly.
So this is a Hedgehog. It is not a depth charge, it's a contact weapon. It has to hit the U-boat to explode. Before you fire these charges, you have to pull the safety pin on each charge. Once it enters the water, as it falls through the water, the spinning of that vane arms it. So it's not armed when you fire it on the ship. It's possible in really bad weather, if the ship is pitching, that the last row of Hedgehogs can hit the prow of the ship. So you don't want these armed until they're safely in the water and away. And one Hedgehog hit, even though it's a tenth the size of a depth charge, one Hedgehog hit can sink a U-boat. This weapon comes into the war late 42, early 43. Once captains and crews get used to using it, it becomes very effective. By the end of the war, a depth charge attack has a 5% chance of sinking a U-boat. A Hedgehog attack has a 20% chance. We only carry 12 reloads, so you got to be thoughtful about when you fire this. This is a spigot mortar. So instead of an infantry mortar that you might be familiar with, a tube, actually fires off a rod that guides it.
Oh, so there's some sort of fuel or some sort of propellant?
There's an explosive propellant charge that launches it, and then this is the detonation charge.
Right.
And it's electrically fired by two crewmen behind the blast shield. The two crewmen are going to stand behind the blast shield. One man can angle the whole bed 15 degrees either side of the ship.
I see. Oh, very simple mechanism. I suppose simple is best.
Simple is good in combat. Less likely to go wrong, less twitchy about getting jammed up. You're also training a lot of young men in World War II. Many of them haven't even graduated from high school. So they've never been in the Navy. Most of them have never been to sea. Most of them have never been away from home. This is a very new, strange environment for them, and they're learning a tremendous amount really fast. But they have to be good at whatever it is they do, because everybody's safety depends upon everybody else. So the guys working this and firing this need to have it. They need to get it if it's going to be effective.
Right. Single step or ripple fire.
Yeah, so that's probably it right there. You have a selector switch. You can either fire single step or ripple. That button's not labeled. This is fire or test. Unfortunately, this is, well, that's the circuit diagram. So I would assume that's the firing position. Now, again, the captain's running all this. He's going to tell you what angle to set the bed at. He's going to decide when you should fire. These fall through the water about 23 feet per second. You have to lead your target. You have to estimate the target's depth and fire that much ahead of it to get these to arrive at the U-boat at the same depth and time.
Is there a special calculator? It's in the brain.
The
The brain is
captain's
the
brain.
calculator.
Right.
Wow.
And obviously, the more you train with anything, the better you're going to be at it. So the more the captain trains the crew, the more he gets used to the idea of how it works, it's going to be more effective. And that's true of any weapon.
All under pressure in combat.
Yes.